The sexual compromise model works by creating compromising material that can later be used as leverage. In Epstein's environment, underage girls' private locations and control access created ideal conditions for this. Encounters happened in places where privacy was guaranteed and oversight was absent. This made documentation and secrecy possible at the same time. The value of compromise is not in public exposure but in private control. Once a powerful individual is involved in an illegal or socially destructive act, they become vulnerable. That vulnerability can be used to secure, favor, silence, protection, or influence. The person does not need to be threatened openly. Awareness of risk is enough. Epstein's properties were structured to support this model. Multiple witnesses described surveillance cameras, restricted rooms, and controlled movement. Whether footage was always recorded or not is less important than the belief that it could be. The perception of being documented is a powerful deterrent against defiance. This system turns sex into currencies. Access to girls creates influence, and influence generates protections. Powerful individuals who fear exposure become invested in keeping the system intact. This creates a self enforcing loop where silence benefits everyone involved. The compromise model also explains why accountability was resisted. Investigation threatened not just one individual but an entire network exposed to risk. When exposure is costly, suppression becomes rational behavior. Legal pressure, media silence, and delayed action all serve the same economic purpose. There is no need for constant blackmail to make this system work. The possibility alone is enough to maintain control. In blackmail economics, fear replaced force, and silence became a transaction. Claims about intelligence links around Epstein and Maxwell are based on patterns, statements, and associations, not on publicly released proof of formal agency employment. Epstein moved within circles that overlapped with intelligence adjacent figures, including politicians, financiers, and individuals connected to defense, diplomacy, and strategic influence. Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, had well documented contacts with multiple intelligence services during his lifetime. This background is part of why the question exists in the first place. Ghislaine Maxwell's upbringing exposed her to intelligence culture early. Robert Maxwell was publicly linked to Israeli intelligence by journalists and formal officials, though full records remain classified. After his death, Ghislaine retained access skills, international mobility, and elite social confidence. These traits are consistent with influence operations but do not prove intelligence tasking. Epstein's unusual legal treatment added to suspicion. The 2008 non-prosecution deal, immunity for unnamed co-conspirators, and Acosta's latest intelligence comment created a perception that Epstein was prosecuted beyond normal legal boundaries. Protection alone does not confirm intelligence status, but it raises legitimate questions about external interest. In intelligence context, ambiguity is often intentional. There is no public evidence showing Epstein or Maxwell were formal intelligence officers. What exists instead is a convergence of access, leverage, secrecy, and protection. These are the tools commonly used by intelligence services, but also by private power networks. The overlap makes clean separation difficult. The most accurate conclusion is this: intelligence involvement has never been proven, but it has also never been fully ruled out. Key records remained sealed or classified, and critical witnesses are dead or silent. The lack of transparency sustains speculations. What matters operationally is not the label, but the effect, whether intelligence linked or not. Epstein and Maxwell operated in a way that benefited from secrecy, leverage, and institutional reluctance to intervene. That functional outcome is observable regardless of formal affiliation. Point number 29: Power, money, and logic. Epstein's operation was not designed to maximize cash profit. Money was abundant and often secondary. What the system consistently produced was access to powerful people and leverage over them. In this model, power was the primary asset, not revenue. Money was used as a tool, not a goal. It funded logistics, silence, travel, and loyalty, but it was never the end product. Epstein did not live like someone running a conventional criminal enterprise focused on profit margins. His lifestyle was oriented toward influence, proximity, and protection. Power compounds in ways money does not. Once Epstein gained access to politicians, financiers, scientists, and royalty, those relationships generated protection and opportunity. That protection reduced legal risk, increased social legitimacy, and discouraged scrutiny. Each layer of power made the system harder to dismantle. Sexual leverage accelerated this process. When powerful individuals became vulnerable, they had an incentive to maintain Epstein's safety and silence. They did not to be paid. They needed the problem to stay buried. This is where power overtook money as the dominant logic. The trafficking system supported this goal by creating ongoing leverage rather than one-time profit. Victims were not just exploited, they were instruments in maintaining influence. The operation stayed small, controlled, and secretive because visibility would destroy power value. This explains why Epstein's network resisted exposure even when money was not at stake. What was being protected was influence, reputation, and control. In this system, losing money was survivable, losing power was not.